Good morning, Paul.
Morning, Jack.
I am with Paul. We are at different locations on the telephone recording this conversation, and we got started for a minute and talked a little bit about. I'd sent him a text earlier and said, "This is a conversation like we always have." And I know that the context of having it recorded can change the thinking you do in relation to the conversation, because Paul and I generally have very, very informative, informed, insightful conversations. I appreciate what he says. I appreciate his frankness. I appreciate his honesty. I appreciate the awareness he's coming to in his process. It's very valuable to me to be involved in anyone interested in doing that because it reminds me of the importance of my doing that and participating at that level and being honest and open and looking at things as they happen rather than as I think they should happen or could have happened or might have happened or should happen. All of that stuff. So, welcome, Paul, on that note.
Yeah, thanks for having me. um, yeah, like that texted me like today. It's funny enough that you said no pressure to do more than what we usually do, and it's funny enough because if I would look at it that way, that if you wouldn't no, you wouldn't tell me you're recording me, then I wouldn't have the pressure at all.
Yeah. Well, and part of what we also discussed, and something I like to remind people, is that circumstances change and it changes how we think of things. The idea that our thinking shouldn't change when circumstances changes is another way of making believe that what's happening shouldn't be happening, and as a result, all that should be happening is what isn't happening. And that may be a very quick way of confusing you, but if I'm thinking about what's happening as it's happening, I can begin to appreciate the predispositions, the ideas, the belief systems, the basic ideas I have about things. And many of those ideas have been seemingly baked into my experience for so long that I think it's natural to have those, when in fact I've never talked about them openly and shown them openly. And as a result, I'm reluctant to, I know intuitively that there's some awareness in me that some of those thoughts have no basis in reality whatsoever. They're just thoughts, conclusions, cultural thoughts, ideas I have about how things should be, how I'd like things to be that I end up believing are the way they should be. I turn my wants into needs in that regard in terms of the addiction of thought. If I make believe that all I am is what I think, I start thinking that all that should happen is what I think. Because if I'm the creator of reality, then everything that I think should happen will happen. And when it doesn't happen, I feel that my hopes are dashed, when in fact I can't have enough hope in something that doesn't actually exist for it to ever exist.
Yeah, I can just look at myself, like how my experience with you and with these conversations that I was so afraid I just realized right before this conversation that there is like it's just my thinking. It's just my thinking is actually makes me the belief that how I used to think that this recorded conversation is going to be heard from not just you and not just myself. I actually also can listen back so I can hear my voice back. And, I had some insecurities about, I'm a foreigner and how I sound. And, it's a lot of insecurities around how I sound and look and all that stuff. But we don't have to go into that deep. But just to look at the fact that the sound that how I going to be heard and I sound like stupid and all that stuff. That is just my thinking.
Yeah. Well, and
But I
it's
used to
also,
believe in that.
well, it's still your thinking.
It
What
is.
you used to believe is that it was true.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're beginning to pry a little bit off of that and start to notice that you as the observer couldn't see that thinking as something you're doing if it was who you were. Like your eyeball can never see itself. Your nose never smells itself. Your mouth never tastes itself. Your ears never hear themselves. They just hear other things. We see other things. That perspective and distance is important. We can't see our eyeball, like I started with. It doesn't mean we can't see. It just means we can't see our eyeball with our own eyeball. And if we look at our eyeball in the mirror and say, no, I can see my eyeball, we're mistaking that vision for as image as reality. An image is an image. It's a copy of it. So when you're thinking about your thinking, you're reflecting on thinking, literally creating imagery.
Yes, and I I like I had so much, I had fear to I was afraid to talking to you,
Mm-hmm.
because I was just talking to myself on the meantime when I was talking to you. Like just seeing myself or seeing our talks from the beginning of our conversations. I first of all, I wasn't hearing what you were saying at all.
Yeah.
When we started having conversations, I remember, like like more than 2 years ago or so. I didn't understand anything, and probably I understand everything. And as you mentioned to me that I was just um, yeah, what I wanted to say with this, that yeah, it's just the insecurity. I think it's a big part um, of like how I opened up about to just letting go of this, how I was thinking
Mm-hmm.
um, about everything.
So if you're thinking about thoughts and you thought those thoughts were real, you're automatically insecure because you know they're not. So while in those early times, Paul, no obsessive thought is ever going to be overcome by someone else's comment. I can't tell you not to think what you're thinking.
I have to have my
Actually, I
experiments.
I can tell you to think what you're not thinking, or not think what you're thinking, but it's up to you, since it's up to you to be thinking what you're thinking now. Those are your choices you're making. It's not thinking doing it to you, it's your use or misuse of your thinking. You are the controller of the ship. You are the captain of the ship in terms of your body, your brain. Your body and brain live synonymously. Your brain is in your body. Your brain is a bodily function, just like feelings are a bodily function. Senses are a bodily function. But when we first met, and I'll ask you this and let you consider it, I don't know how quickly you'll answer it, but you had some sense there was something there that you wanted to understand,
Yeah,
even when you didn't think you did understand it.
yeah, it was just a big attraction. I was drawn
Yeah,
into I was drawn into something I couldn't describe, and I couldn't
yeah.
it wasn't um I I didn't know why, but I you know even regardless of, like, I thought I don't understand anything, I was just drawn into spending time with you. I was drawn into calling you, maybe not as often as now, but I knew there is something more than just putting down drugs and alcohol and putting down, um, you know, um, like, all that stuff which is came along my journey, like, um, all these substances, that it was
Mm-hmm.
just end of the day, it's like that's how I was obsessing over other different substances, that like food and sugar and all this stuff, and porn, and and putting down all that stuff. It's like, I think, opened the door to actually see that there is so much more in life uh other than all, I don't know. Yeah. And it's I still, I often tell you that it's still hard to describe it because I just can't describe it, what's going on.
Right.
I
Well,
actually,
that's why we talk about it. That's the whole point of
yeah,
this conversation. If
yeah,
if we've
and
been if we've been thinking obsessively through history, we've developed a whole language and a connotation of language and semantics in language that justify the thinking we're doing, when in fact, if the thinking is irrational, there's no justification for it whatsoever. No matter how much justification we have, no matter how much rationalization, no matter how many excuses, it's never going to be enough to do anything other than try to continue to do what we're doing and think that somehow or another it'll get better while we're ending up doing exactly the same thing to continue to maintain the experience that's worse.
yeah. It's funny now because last time we spent some time a couple of days ago and we were talking about um, this experience, this awakening, not awakening, I would say so, or it's a type of awareness. It was a pure awareness that I had this. I would call it out of body experience, or I don't know how to call it to be understood. Um, but I was able to see what I was actually doing at that moment,
Yeah.
and I definitely needed that experience to happen, but there is different experiences I would say it happened to me, and different challenges in life happened to me um, to have a um, more awakenings, I would say, and but what would you suggest if somebody is
We're doing it.
um, yeah, I mean, it's the freedom, which is just having this conversation just between you and me, is just so priceless.
Well, I appreciate that because it is not. This is not a monetary based conversation because the value of life is not rooted in substance in terms of consumerism or having of things. It's the essence of all things. It's the actual base root of it all. And my sense is that those things we have would be much more meaningful to us if we had them as they are rather than as something that's going to make up for some deficiency in our thinking. If we think by having a better car, we're going to look better to people. Exactly what we were talking earlier about the idea of being recorded. When I share in front of 100 people, I feel very different than I do when I stand in front of 6 people. Part of it is a lack of that experience. I'm much more familiar with dealing with smaller groups than large groups. But there's also some suspicion, and I'm sure that it's accurate, that there is some parts in my conversation that I haven't quite come to terms with, that I'm talking about that are still wrong, and I'm talking about them as though they're right. And so that awkwardness becomes more apparent when more people may be listening, because I know that someone may see through that. And that awkwardness and that embarrassment tends to be the thing that's kept me quiet through my life rather than expose the wrong by simply stating what I think and letting people give me some perspective to that I may not be able to get if I sit alone and keep thinking about the same thinking. It may require that I utilize other people because everyone else is already here. We're already offering that to one another. To stay quiet about something we can do doesn't seem to make a lot of sense if we're suffering from loneliness and thinking, like a friend of mine said, that alcoholics and addicts are the only people that try to cure loneliness with isolation.
Mm,
And the
yeah,
idea that I stay alone, I don't get challenged. I don't have an opportunity to notice, oh, this is a pretty wonky. Nobody can say, maybe you want to look at that a little more. Maybe you want to question that. Maybe we can talk about that more openly. That kind of bursts the bubble of the idea that those things are something I'm keeping to my seeming self in some way. They become part of a conversation. We're unique as a species in multiple ways. one of which is that we can think about our thinking. And I'm not sure that's completely not possible for animals, but for the most part, what they're thinking about is what's actually happening. And they're thinking about food, shelter, clothing as those basic necessities. So are they warm? If they're not, they try to get warm. Are they fed? If they're not, they try to eat. Right? They want food and shelter is also clothed for them. They come fully clothed for the most part. They've got coats and things that go with the environments that they're designed to live in. But they adjust to what's happening very quickly. We don't always do that. We can always often adjust in the absolute wrong way, and then excessively go in that direction, thinking somehow it's going to save us. But we also have, aside from the contemplative ability we have to think about our thinking, we've also developed language as a skill of communication and a language of unity, a language of communicating ideas and thoughts and references of what we're thinking so that we can collectively participate in each other's worlds and seeming worlds as though they're separate, but you notice that we do have a very common denominator between us. But we've developed multiple languages. We don't have one language like animals. Birds tend to sing the same song in the same species, the same way, or similar. Whales and dolphins seem to communicate in very similar ways. They don't seem to create different languages at different times in history for different groups, and et cetera, et cetera. We have done that. So in some way, you're concerned about how you sound. There are a lot of people who've spoken English their entire life who are concerned about how they sound too, because they're
Yeah.
somewhat wary of the ideas, like I am. I have a very keen sensitivity to how I say what I say. I want to develop it in a way where it's most accurate, but it's authentic given that it's what I'm doing now, but it doesn't mean that it's accurate in every respect. And I like that opening because there's a sense of spontaneity in knowing there's more to think about because it's always refreshed, it's always new, it's always, rather than thinking all I need to do is keep repeating the same thing, which becomes very stagnant and stale. And very often, air that gets stale becomes toxic. Water that gets stale or stagnant becomes toxic. Basic elements of life, things that are absolutely necessary for life forms to exist, turn to poison if they get stagnant. So too does my thinking, which is why we consider other people toxic, when in fact it's our own toxicity that we're seeing in them. So my sense in those early times, Paul, and I hear this a lot, so I say it. I've heard many people say, I don't understand what you're saying, but something seems right. And it isn't about what I'm saying that seems right. It's about their own awareness that there's a rightness and a truth and a reality and a substance and awareness that's absolute that they have, that they simply haven't been paying attention to with thinking. So if thinking is a byproduct of reality and we've been thinking is reality, we've been thinking there is no other reality. That would be a major flaw in thinking. And so it has been through human history.
Yeah, it's exhausting, as we talked about it before.
Of course, it's exhausting. You
It
can't,
is
to
really
try to do
exhausting.
something that's impossible is not only exhausting, but the results continually confirm failure with no reprieve whatsoever. Normally if something's possible, everything you do gets a little bit of an indication of success. Wilbur and Orville Wright, when they were building the airplane, had a bike shop. And in the bike shop, they had a little machine that they created with a wing on it. They were trying to figure out what is it that makes a bird fly? What is it that makes a wing float? How do you get loft in air? And they kept carving this thing, and they had a fan that they'd crank with the hand, and the thing was on like two poles on the side, and it was balsa wood, so it was light wood. And as they shaped it, if it went down, they realized, okay, well, we're having the effect. It's wrong direction, but if it were upside down, that would work. And they started recarving and recarving until that hand fan began to have that thing float. So they were getting little bits of indications that something was working in the midst of a lot of other things that weren't working, for them to eventually get to the point where they figured out what the shape of the wing is, and that shape is the same shape that's used with all the computerization and everything else. What they did by trial and error, by hand, is exactly the basic same shape of wings today. So the difference is when it's impossible, you never get any progress. The only progress you get is more impossibility. And you know it. You feel it in your gut. You feel something's wrong. You feel something sick. You feel what you were talking about earlier, insecure, doubtful. It isn't you that's doubtful and insecure. It's what you are choosing to do within your thinking. That's what's doubtful. And to read it that way is like reading a book correctly or a manual that tells you how to make something work correctly. If we're reading our body language as though it's us, we're misreading the language completely by thinking it's something so inherent that we can't do anything about it. That it's genetics, it's history, it's just there's nothing we can do about it. That's the addictive thinking. When I see it as something I'm doing, I say, oh, okay, well, that's something I can also not do. When I'm in the addictive cycle, again, I can all I think of is this is the only thing I can do, so I'm going to keep repeating it, hoping someday it'll get better. And there's an old adage in sobriety that says insanity is repeating the same thing, expecting a different answer. But that isn't the ultimate insanity. The insanity is repeating the same thing while you're getting the same answer over and over and over and over again. You're getting failure. You're getting desperation. You're getting anxiety. You're getting stress. You know, it levels way beyond the simple inconvenience of finding that something isn't going as smoothly as you hope it might. In one instance, it's impossible, and the other instance, it's just simply improbable. If I'm trying to come up with a way to develop a rocket, the chances are I'm not going to get it done today, right? Even with everything everybody knows about a rocket, if I decide I'm going to build one, it's going to take some time to be able to start to accomplish that. There's a probability in there, but it isn't impossible. We've seen it happen. We know it can happen. People knew birds could fly. They get that a pretty good inclination. But Da Vinci drew things back in the 1500s. I think he developed the first helicopter. The ideas were there, and imagination is an incredible thing. When we use our imagination to make believe it's reality, we create the greatest liability we can possibly face because we undermine the potential we have for the creative intelligence and expression and development of that expression into some useful form for life forms to appreciate. So seeing where our limits are, like not understanding, is very good information to understanding. Because at least we understand we don't understand. That is a level of understanding that gives rise to learning and growth and awareness at a human level, on a thinking level. If we have a knowing sense that's perfectly at peace, that's all knowing, all power, all of those things, omniscient, omnipotent, all of those things that have been thought of and discussed through history, infinite, unlimited, infinite awareness, pure consciousness. If it's pure, how could we not be a part of it? And how could it not be a part of our nature, except to thought? If nature's natural, it's got to be our nature. Otherwise, it would be unnatural. And we've been living as though it is for a century and millennia. Not everyone everywhere, because there have been some pretty highly developed civilizations on Earth who have thought very differently. But even those empires collapsed for some fault, for some reason. So when we say we don't understand, we do understand that. And it sort of puts some stability to the process rather than a sense of impossibility to the fact that we'll never get there when we're already there. Again, the present is the only place we ever are. It's the only place any thought ever occurs. It's the only place any step is ever taken. It's the only thing anything is ever defended in. It's the only place that anything is ever thought of, accepted, realized, all of it. And we think about our thinking so defectively, we make believe things that aren't true are true to justify the sickness of the thinking we're doing about the thinking we're doing it with. the how and the what. So if we understand, we don't understand, that's understanding right now. That's something I can bank on, something that's a guarantee. But it gives me a chance from the freedom of looking at it that way to grow and develop and start looking and saying, if I know more already, and my awareness is the awareness of the universe, then it isn't just mine, it's all of ours. And everything I see is also that. Seeing it that way is a very different way of approaching human understanding and human limitations of understanding, because now I'm not coming at it as something that's a mystery. I'm coming at it as something that's only a mystery as to why I keep thinking I need to think about it correctly for it to be, when I start thinking about it as already existing and something that already is, as it is now the chance of my beginning to discover how it works is infinitely easier, because I'm not looking for it somewhere that it isn't. I'm not looking in some place, somewhere else, some place that doesn't exist. Since everything that's here is here now. Everything that's here is here now. Always. And now is the sum total of everything that's ever happened. So there is no past to look for because it's always here. If I go looking for it, I'm setting off on that same cataclysmic concept. If it's here, and I admit right now is the sum total of everything that has ever happened for anyone and everything that has ever done anything, it's a very different place to start from, since this has always been the starting place. It's always been the starting line, and there's never been any finish line. It's always starting new. There's never any end. That's a timeless time. You had said something earlier about timelessness, if I remember.
Yeah, probably. I don't remember.
Well, I
Um,
think you were talking about that out of body experience, and
ah,
that may have been it.
yes.
But you're right that the awareness of that absolute state of being is not in space and time. The body is in space and time. The thinking is in space and time. Anything that's in a process of change is in the space and time. But the one thing that doesn't change is the nature of everything that always changes. The fact that we can see that everything always changes doesn't change within the context of everything changing shows that the absolute is ever present, even when we're in the middle of the bits and pieces that we're able to identify and think of as separate and divided, divisible. It's all here, it's all now. And to begin seeing things in their whole, meaning opposites are basically functioning off of, they're just different positions about the same thing. Starting to see that when I think something's good, it's because I don't think it's bad. It doesn't make it good or bad, it just is my decision about it. It's my preference. I like chocolate better than I like vanilla. But when I started noticing that, I started appreciating vanilla more, especially when the yogurt store didn't have any chocolate.
You have no
Rather than my
choice.
whole night
Sorry.
being ruined, I'm like, oh, well, actually, vanilla is pretty good.
Yeah. Um, it's exhausting sometimes to realize that um, just all realizing, actually seeing and able to live in reality itself, just to like little bits and pieces sometimes, um, and but just able to see it, that what is out there, and
Yeah.
not what is in here, inside.
Well, and seeing that though, Paul, you're starting to see what you're making. You're starting to see that you're seeing out there what you're doing inside. So when you think thoughts are real and reality and the basis of your thinking is wrong, you're going to think you shouldn't be thinking what you're thinking while you're thinking what you're thinking, right? So think of how exhausting that is.
It is.
I shouldn't be thinking what I'm thinking while I'm thinking of what I'm thinking, but my thoughts are now I blame my thoughts for doing it as though they have some independent life of their own and have nothing to do with me. Just like if I start flapping my arm and I say, oh, my arm just keeps flapping and I don't know how to stop it. That would be foolish. But we don't do that with thinking. We take it seriously. We think this is really happening
Yeah,
because
and you go.
we can conclude that we're right. And then because we conclude that, we think we are, rather than start to say, why would I be concluding it if I was right? I would just be applying the thing. I would be utilizing the thing. I would be gainfully producing something as a result of that thing rather than debating it in my head like a tennis match. So those ideas we have give us the impression that we're not in reality. That isn't true. How could that be true? How could reality be real if we could just step away from it because we think of something else? Again, it reinforces the idea that we really think thinking is real. We're
Yeah.
never away from it. We're never out of it. We're always in it, delusionally thinking we're not. But think if that exhaustion is the exhaustion, Paul, it's not the thinking about it finally is something that you're when you become aware of the if I think my thinking is something I shouldn't be doing, I'm also thinking what I'm feeling is something I shouldn't be feeling. And then I'm going to say things I think I shouldn't say, so I stay quiet and I start developing this whole manner of talking that makes me feel better about what's going on because I feel so bad about what's happening.
Talking about the
When you,
whole isolation starts.
well, there's an attempt to isolate while we're always connected. The isolation is just the idea that if I get my head away from everyone else's, I'm never going to run the risk of somebody telling me you're crazy.
Hmm.
What you're thinking is nuts. It doesn't have any place. I don't want to do that. I don't want to subject myself to that. So I go into what I call isolation. Well, in fact, I have to fend off all the other possibilities of interactions because I'm interacting with everything at the same time.
I think
But
that's exhausting to realize.
well, to the point I want to make, if I can, is that as you become aware of what you're doing, you become aware of the cost and the effect of what you've been doing. So, as I said to you the other day, when you feel exhausted, you're starting to admit, rather than deny and continue to cause the exhaustion, you're starting to admit that you have accumulated an enormous amount of stress in your system that is exhausting to maintain.
And I keep
And
doing it.
to a degree, but to be able to even notice that is the beginning of not doing that. The
It is.
same as when I smoked pot, I told you that my major disease was marijuana. I drank alcoholically from the first time I ever drank, but and I always drank in ways that went way beyond making any sense with, but it was always in combination with some drug, speed, uppers, eventually cocaine. Anything that could help me drink more was better because I get so sick from it. But marijuana in those off times would carry me, because it would numb everything and keep everything sort of suppressed in my system. And I would not feel better, but I wouldn't feel anything that was worse. So the betterment wasn't actually dealing with what was worse, it was just ignoring what was happening. And if I'd used ignorance as a source of success in my drinking and using, it's the same sort of thinking that I'd been using my whole life before that. Thinking if I don't pay attention to it, it isn't happening. It's exhausting to do that. To see
Hmm.
it honestly is to begin to actually allow the exhaustion to recover and to recover from the exhaustion. It's just like if you kept your hand in motion all the time, and thought 24 hours a day, you need to keep this going. So you can't get a good night's sleep because you're constantly thinking. Every time you start to fall asleep and realize your hand isn't in motion, you got to wake up and keep it going. That's what's happening in our internal system. And it skews everything that we see because, from a human perspective, my viewpoint, my point of view, is the point from which I'm seeing everything. And if my internal struggle is so exhausting, I'm seeing all those things out there as exhausting. I'm seeing them as a problem, them as something I can't approach, them as something I cannot do anything about. So I become less productive, less useful, less active. I disassociate. take a break, start to disconnect, rather than go out and try anything. Say, of course, I've never done this before. Why am I going to be good at it? I'm starting for the first time. I'm playing tennis for the first time. I'm flying a kite for the first. I don't know how to get a kite up in the air until I do it, and then say, "Oh, that's one way of doing it." Every time I do it, I get a little bit better at it. But this internal predisposition that's been upside down and backward for so long, once seen clearly, is disturbing, is exhausting, because you're seeing exhaustion honestly. You're seeing the disturbance honestly. You're seeing the discomfort honestly. You're seeing the insanity honestly, the insecurity, the doubt, the uncertainty, the stress, the pressure, all of it starts to become clear. Oh, I've been inducing this, and it's been imposed by that inducement. I've been inducing it and imposing it on my system, and impositions maintained as though the reality are depressing because it is a weight we are not designed to bear because it isn't even real. It's fully imagined, just like a dream has us imagine we're running from something down a hallway that never seems to end. Seems real when we're in it. And the awakening we're talking about is starting to see that we've never been in it, and we've always been aware that we weren't in it, or we wouldn't have suffered those things because that suffering's been telling us the whole time we were simply doing something wrong. Not
Mm.
me wrong. What I'm doing with what I have is wrong. Just like if I buy a car and think it's supposed to be driven in reverse and keep running into things and think something's wrong with the car, or that I'm a bad driver. It's hard to drive a car backwards and do what you can when you're driving it forward. Just not designed for that. Like the old cart before the horse idea, which obviously was something they used well before the car was invented to become so popular as to still be used today. We have examples of this thinking through history being talked about. It hasn't been identified as an addiction, and something that even people who think they're not doing it are doing to the degree that they think they need to deny that they might be not doing it or might be doing it. To any degree any thought is held that is not true as truth, we have an inner conflict that is insurmountable as long as we maintain that thought. And that's on you and that's on me. Because we each, if we're free to think what we want, we freely want what we think, and we want what we have, and we want what we say, and all of that. Not because it's the best thing we can do, but when we're doing it, it's an indication of something that, if it is wrong, we could certainly correct, rather than think it's nothing we can do anything about. So we just continue doing it, which is the addictive, unholy trinity. I don't have anything to do with it. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to keep doing the same thing.
I think, yeah, I think that like stop following those and and I still do, but then to able to see it more and open up a little more about, I mean, just to the starting point, like just to realizing this, it's so exhausting. Just to actually even start thinking about how much this, like how much I was following what these thoughts was telling me, and to believe and to identify, and like once I was able to see that evidently that I actually don't have to follow and I don't have to identify, and once I had that experience with me, that it's just exhausting to experience that, like how much I that's who I was.
Well, it never was who you were, it's what you did.
I was thinking, yes.
Yeah. So you're still thinking about things in that way. So I would suggest, which is also the case for me, Paul, that the reason I feel exhausted at times is because I'm aware of the exhaustion I'm creating right now with the things I used to think I wasn't doing. So
Yeah, I can see it. I can see that.
if I'm doing it now, I'm reinforcing the exhaustion because I'm denying that I need rest and recovery. I'm denying the potential recovery. What would there be to recover if it wasn't something that was natural? So recovery is starting to say, I must be doing that now, not only to be witnessing the exhaustion, but to feel so exhausted. Otherwise, if I was really allowing fully my human experience to witness the alignment I naturally have with an absolute inspired state of being that's wise and intuitive, I wouldn't feel exhausted at all. I would feel so inspired. That exhaustion would evaporate like darkness disappears when a light switched on. Would take no more than that. So there's obviously some indication, in my experience, that I'm still doing the same thing, thinking I'm not doing it because I've gotten better. So I've become more cognizant of discussing it is something, it's not something I'm no longer doing, it's something I'm getting better at talking about. And that's the whole point of this discussion, is to do that with you and do that with others. And I'm also developing something right now that I want to talk about as a monologue to anyone listening out there. We've had over 100 countries listen, almost 1,000 cities as of today.
Mm.
And I want to engage people out there in the conversation is an example of how what Bill Wilson originally saw from his hospital bed was that the message of sobriety could be carried one person to another, one alcoholic to another alcoholic, because the connection between people who share a common suffering is profoundly more able to deal with that problem than one with somebody that doesn't either have the problem or doesn't want to admit they have the problem. So the difference is, just like reality is that we all share everything, the difference is in that is that if I'm telling you what to do, you're not going to listen to me. You're going to hear just what, like you said, when I started talking, you didn't understand what I was saying. You didn't hear it. You heard it, but you didn't know what to make of it. And what you made of it, well, you were trying within the confines of what you'd always done with the thinking about the thinking about the thinking about the thinking. You thought adding it to that blender of toxic waste was going to somehow purify it, when in fact it just turned it into more reactive behaviors, defensive, defiant, just another way of saying, I don't even know what this is, because boy, to admit it, it would completely tear apart the whole basis of who I thought I was. My whole life would fall apart. And it isn't your life that's falling apart, it's the lies you've been maintaining about who you are that are falling apart. When you see that, yeah, you're laughing because I was going to say, when you see that, it's laughable compared to take it so seriously as to think we have to kill ourselves to stop it. Think of that. We killed the body that's having the thoughts rather than simply notice the thoughts we're having and say, oh, that's a thought. If I am free to notice them honestly, I'm free to notice I have noticed that I have absolutely no obligation to continue. None whatsoever, ever. So if I'm doing it now, I'm doing it freely. That's the sick thing. To think I'm doing it freely and doing something sick freely is an indication of how deeply seated I think this stuff is and how hidden I think it is and how little I think I have to do with it. I haven't gotten better enough to get past that.
Mm.
So to some degree, I'm still in it in terms of my thinking. I'm not really in it though, Paul. Like when I talk about it, I want to clarify. I'm not in it. I know that I'm not in it, but I certainly
Well,
think I'm in it. I certainly must think I'm in it to be doing that.
I am.
Yeah. Well, so you and I in this, think about that. You know, in the big book, it talks about identification as one of the hallmarks to just identify the problem.
Yeah.
So with that identification starts with the person, you, me, anyone listening. If you identify with the problem, you don't have to identify with the story or the language or the accent or the sex of the gender of the person. You don't have to identify with any of that to say, oh, I do struggle with this kind of thinking. I am aware of that. I'm aware of the anxiety, the stress, the defensiveness, the reactiveness, the broken relationships, the historic sense of not wanting to fit in, not belong. All that kind of stuff comes from that thinking.
You
And if it's
mentioned that
something I'm
mirror.
doing, hmm,
You mentioned that mirror exercise, which was fantastic. What was that again? Like I remember, like when I had a situation at one point, and you said like go to the mirror, and you said write down what I see, or what was it? Do you
I don't
remember?
remember. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I know that the idea of standing in front of a mirror and telling the mirror to take the clothes off that you're wearing because you don't like what you see would be crazy, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't happen.
And it's
Hard.
exactly what we do in our thinking. It's exactly what we do in our thinking. If I think I shouldn't be thinking what I'm thinking while I'm thinking what I'm thinking, think of that. I'm arguing with a reflection on thought of thought with a thought that I'm continuing to maintain to claim it shouldn't be happening while I'm the one promoting the thought and then trying to fight the thought and demote the thought as even belonging or fitting or having any place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, like the earlier conversations we had, you gave me some exercise, which was just fantastic to open the door for me to see that, first of all, like what I see in the mirror, that's not who I am, and and that opened
Mm-hmm.
another door, that what I feel, that's not who I am, that my emotions not who I am, and then it went all the way to like my thinking, and what I think, it's not who I am.
Well,
And
I may have
and
said to you that if you look in the mirror, you're seeing your image backward,
yes,
which is interesting because a lie is the attempt to have what's false become true. It's trying to turn the laws of nature around. It's trying to turn the law and order of the universe. It's trying to make believe that what's false is true and what's true is false. So the one thing a lie claims to be is the only thing it can never be. This is the impossibility that I was talking about earlier. Any of those thoughts we have that are not true, we think are true, are causing an appearance of the world being upside down and backward. And what's interesting when you take a photograph, the photograph is actually taken upside down and backward. If I remember right, the optics of it turn the image upside down, so it needs to be turned over. The image on the final print is turned over.
mm,
So if you look at your image in the mirror, your right eye is your left eye in the mirror looking back, and your left eye is your right eye in the mirror looking back. Everything is backward. So if we're reflecting on thoughts, we're seeing the same thing and then thinking it's reality. So our thinking is turned backward because the lie isn't what we're thinking and how we're thinking. Well, it's the idea that it's reality that's turning what and how we're thinking into this idea that it's something we can't do anything about because we've given it this proposed reality that it isn't. So of course we can't do anything about it. There isn't anything to do, literally. There isn't anything there but the delusion that there's something there. It's just me insisting the thought is right, the thought is real. It doesn't make
yeah,
it real and it doesn't make it right. It makes me fucking tired and pissed off and irritated and upset and mourning and grieving the seeming loss of life I have in the moment and the people I have it with. And then having to use someone else's death to justify those feelings that I have collected for years until I notice that that feeling couldn't possibly be so overwhelming. As hard as death is, because it's so final, it's so permanent, it's so complete for the individual that's now missing physically, the fact is it's an absolute guarantee that we each face that and we act as though it shouldn't happen. And when it does, it's a shock. It's another way of seeing things backward and wrong.
mm,
And it's another way of diminishing our capacity to the point where we feel less than, feel useless, feel hopeless, feel faithless, because we've been having hope and hopeless ideas. We've been having faith in faithless ideas. We've been trusting ideas that are untrustworthy. And the one thing that we can trust about them is that the promise they offer is not a promise at all. It's going to be a broken promise. We're not getting what we thought we were going to get. Immediate gratification turns to long-term suffering. Why? Because it was never gratifying to begin with. It was a momentary lapse of sanity to imagine that I could deny reality and somehow use something else, some other substance, to deny the lack of substance in my own thinking and not notice that the chemical reaction in my body is put into an emergency mode, and all of a sudden my body doesn't know how to. It's making chemicals for emergencies that don't exist and depleting those for ones that are in reserve for the eventual potential of a risky situation or a dangerous situation, an emergency.
Mm. And I was addicted to that. I was that degree that, I love those emergencies when it's like something's not normal,
Well, because we're using adrenaline as a drug to give ourselves that excitement, that thrill, that sensation you get when you do something dangerous. Think of what people do: jump off of out of airplanes without parachutes and get the parachute from the other. These are all thrill seekers, literally, are looking for that jolt of electricity that comes with adrenaline. Now, I don't know if that's wrong or right, but I would suggest that if we're using chemicals that are there to help us in times of need, it's no surprise that when we're in times of need, we don't have the chemicals available and feel depressed over what's happening. We've depressed our capacity to actually have those utilized at points when they're functionally usable for functions that we're just glamorizing. And people want to do that. They're totally free to do that. I'm not suggesting they shouldn't.
Yeah, it's
But the
uh, it's
but the
really.
best of those people very often meet their fate, the worst fate, because the probability may be low, but the possibility is always present. To tempt fate is to intentionally, proactively step into a danger zone. And once again, my sense is this is a metaphor for the idea that I can get away with the idea that my thinking shouldn't be what I'm thinking, and what's happening shouldn't be what is happening, and I'm not here when I think I'm not here. I go somewhere else. It's all a metaphor for that, because there's no greater sense of trauma for the body than to make believe I don't belong in the universe, and I don't fit, and I don't have any place, and I don't have any useful purpose.
I think like that's
Why
all.
else would I be here? It's horrifying to think that. That is present traumatic stress.
think that whole isolation comes back again, which is, it's it's just it's just a big thing to break apart or tear apart, I would say. Something I still struggle with, like the whole isolation part. Um, and it's so funny enough because if I like, for me it's just the opposite is connection. And if I connect, and if I share, and if I call, and if I actually I just anyhow some way I try to connect. um it changes right away. Like, I actually don't isolate. I can isolate and connect.
Well, when you connect, first of all, you're never isolated. So when you connect in that way you think you're connecting, you're beginning to confirm what's actually true. We're all connected. We're always connected. If you try to disconnect, you're trying to do what's impossible, because you'll never be disconnected. So it doesn't matter how isolated you get, you'll never get enough isolation, just like you'll never have enough excuses to excuse the inexcusable.
Mm.
There are no excuses to justify irresponsible behavior. There's no justification for it. But we act irresponsible. To act irresponsible and acknowledge we're acting irresponsible isn't an excuse. It's the confronting of it, the having of it, the noting of it, the acceptance of it, and the actual facing of it, and saying, oh, that was irresponsible. That was inconsiderate. That was immoral. We can justify it all we want. It's never going to be enough. This is exactly what consuming substance is. We take a lack of substance in our own thinking and then think we're going to fill it by consuming substances outside of us. And it doesn't just mean alcohol and drugs and all that. It means gambling, the intoxication of gambling, the intoxication of sex, the intoxication of relationships that aren't always good for us, the intoxication of controlling other people, the intoxication of making and having more and more and more and more and more, and yet it's never enough.
Mm.
That's torture. That isn't satisfying. That's torture. And it isn't gratifying. It maybe seems like it. And yet, why, if it was gratifying, would we continue to find that place and search for that thing in an amount enough that never seems to be enough? We claim it's gratifying. It isn't. We're lying about that. We're giving ourselves an experience to justify it so that we can continue to deny what we're actually doing. You are never a part. If you begin to notice that the basic principles do not change, the law and order of the universe does not change. Everything is functioning on the basis that it was designed to function all the time. And everything that's happening is always new. Right now has never been experienced by any human on earth or anything on earth ever before. And yet, in that way, it's always been seen, it's always been that way. Again, you see the absolute by looking at things absolutely. If it's never been this way before, then of course I might think I don't know what to do. I'm
And
relying on all the old thinking I developed to just try to get by, rather than say, wow, if it's all possible, let's live with that for a minute. Why don't I just spend the day in that? It's all possible. Every possibility is possible today. Doesn't mean impossibility is possible. It means I'm able to think impossibility is possible and suffer the consequences as a result. But possibility means I can apply the thought and see a productive result from that thought, not just a vacant, absent, scarce, conflicted, hateful, spiteful consequence.
mm, yeah, um,
We talked the other day about noticing whenever you wonder where you are, just to look at your feet.
I love that. And I start with that in the morning right away when I was like, I would get into this thinking right away. And it's like what I should, what I will, what I'm going to do, and all that stuff, like the planning and then the feelings, all that stuff, which is just look down and feel my feet and look out in the window and hear the birds singing around. And living in like Southern California, like 3 blocks away from the beach, and just the gratefulness comes in right away when it's like, oh wow, okay, this is not a bad life at
The
all.
fullness of greatness becomes obvious, and that gratefulness isn't something you need to contrive and do because you'll naturally have that sensation. The great fullness of life is the greatness of life. It's profound compared to the thinking we do because it's for finding. It's not for questioning. It's not doubtful and uncertain and insecure and vulnerable. It's absolute in every respect. There's no risk in it at all. There's no threat. There's no defense. There's no reaction. There's no irresponsibility. There's no lies. It's an absolute state of present awareness that we all share and that everything is included in. That essence of everything happening is part of it. Everything, every molecule, everything we don't even think is a thing yet that's happening right now is happening. Regardless of whether we think about it or we think about it correctly, it's happening exactly as it's happening, precisely as it's happening.
Yeah,
And to
it's
begin
really
to acknowledge those things is begin to notice how silly the little thoughts we have that we took for reality and we took for truth that cause so much upheaval and so much complication, so many complications and so much consternation and spite and contempt and all those other petty byproducts that came out of it to try to just feel better about it by thinking other people are worse than we are so we could think we were better. That
Just
isn't
talking about the
healthy.
yeah, the appreciation and talking about like the ungratefulness, like, you know, um how much I'm de appreciate
Yeah,
about life
depreciating.
itself. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a
And I think,
depreciation. You know what that is? It's an exhaustion of the useful life of something. You know how much useful life there is in a thought that has no basis? None. You can't
yeah,
exhaust it. It's exhausted from the beginning. So think of that in terms of the exhaustion you feel. If the
yeah,
thing I'm trying to do is exhausted from the very start, it's because of what I'm doing now with my thinking that it's causing that effect. You know, I listened to a physicist the other day that was talking about the nature of the subatomic level, which is the tiniest level compared to the macro level. They have fairly well figured out in a lot of ways. The micro level seems to be a mystery because it functions differently than the macro level. In the micro level, they cannot see anything. So what do? Those collider, you know, the colliders that they make, they're photon, or I forget what they're called. That may be it, but they're accelerators where they take a bunch of photons that they can't see and get them going so fast and then have them collide into something, and all they can see is the result of that collision. So what they see is the effect. And it's exactly what we do with thinking. We don't see the thoughts. We see the effect of those thoughts. And to miss the effect as the reflection of those thoughts is to miss the value that our body language is giving us and to become functionally illiterate, literally unable to read our own body language in relation to the owner's manual that's telling us how we're doing with what we have.
mm,
So, in noticing the effects, you can begin acknowledging the cause. And to see the effects, what I did, I used to think the effects because they didn't seem to be coming from me. Because I disowned the thinking I was doing, I thought the effects were God punishing me, the devil punishing me, other people, the confluence of sick people, and all this other kind of phobic stuff that I could develop. It was the economy, it was capitalism, all this stuff that was the reason for my failure financially.
yeah, the
I will go,
excuses.
I went to great lengths, which is why in sobriety I'm asked to go to any length to stay sober, to be honest, to confront things correctly, to right wrongs rather than act right.
Yeah, I often forget this is not an overnight matter. I, it's just a great reminder.
Yeah. Well, the human cycle, starts with birth, ends with death. And I realized with my daughter's death that the one thing, the leading cause of death is birth. And I never had thought of it that way because I was thinking from this preposterous state of mind that it shouldn't have happened. Why did it happen? It could have been avoided. All that kind of stuff was going through my brain, which showed me how clever I am at making believe that what happened hadn't happened, to try simply not to face the permanent fact that she had died. In terms of her human experience, that human body is now disintegrated, literally. It no longer exists in the form that I was used to having. But those
Mm,
things it disintegrated into are not missing in this universe. They're still here in exactly a different form, but the same essence that was there when she was. She too then must be that same essence. And for me to depreciate that is not to give her any tribute whatsoever, but to disqualify her as deserving of tribute. And I do not want to live that way for her or anyone else. I've done it enough to know it's a no winner. It's a loser. And I'm not interested in that personally. And I don't really believe anyone else is either. And I believe we've been struggling to try to come to terms with what is it that keeps us on this loop, asking questionable questions, constantly seeking, constantly on a journey, constantly on a path that humans have been doing since the beginning of written history. And clearly, the questions asked are not the right questions. And the solutions offered are not the right solutions as a result, because we've been looping and looping and looping around this same context for centuries, creating the same paltry results, fixing certain things while creating bigger problems at the same time.
Mm. Yeah. Well, it's nice talking to you.
Thanks. You too. For everyone out there, I'm going to make a proposal at some point soon to engage with me or us in some way. I would love to, since we've spoken to so many people and have been in dialogue mentally, we haven't necessarily been in dialogue physically with a voice. And I would appreciate any voice interested in being heard and talking, whether it be alone, unrecorded, or recorded. My sense is the recording becomes the message Bill Wilson saw that could be carried from one alcoholic to another, and then ended up today is in 190 different countries, and there's only 193 countries in the world. And he started at a time where there was no internet, there was no Zoom, there was no cell phone, there was none of this ease of communication that we have today. No podcasts where you can sit and listen at any time during the day to what to what somebody has said. And the broader implication of this is that when we do these things and act on these things and talk about these things, if we have a common bond in suffering in any way and talk about it, that conversation is useful to other people who may think they can't talk about it and may think that they are alone and they have no hope and no solution, when in fact none of that is true. We all offer that, and I would like to encourage anyone out there to begin to participate with us in some way. There's a link by text, and there's also an email at the bottom of the, I think it's contact@mentalobsession.com, and the link at the top is a text link. So either way, you can go through. Well, that's it. I think they're all on all of the different. I'll have to check that on Apple and all that. But wherever you're seeing this, there should be a link that contacts me directly, and I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime, no charge. There's no cost to this whatsoever, and also encourage that these conversations be held more publicly to show that people who have never met, who do meet, have so much in common that they can talk to and influence and help and support other people who are similarly struggling in that same way. Whatever their way is, my sense is covered by this umbrella of this mental problem that has been going on through human history and taken for granted to be our nature. It's not human nature to think that way.
Hmm.
Love you, Paul. You're a good man. I appreciate you, and I appreciate that you're open and continuing to stand in the face of this, because I know that it can be daunting, and I know that I talk a lot. So,
Hmm. No,
um,
no, actually, I appreciate you. And, I often think like, what Jack is getting out from this. And,
I would hope as much as you and me. I mean, I think more, Paul. I think that's the benefit of it. When you're dealing in an absolute state, everyone wins. There's no losing at all. Everyone gets more than the individuals would have gotten on their own. So the sum of the parts becomes greater than the whole, as it becomes greater than the whole. And that's the difference between the synergy and the synchronicity and the simultaneous nature of spontaneity and the absolute nature of inspiration and in the invitation of intuition and the wisdom of that intuition. Wisdom in the Bible and other books has always been what humans have sought, and yet we've been idiotically pursuing thinking as the source. How much wisdom is going to come out of that? It's all been fake wisdom. Big shots trying to promote ideas that aren't big at all. They're just ideas, inflated, grandiose, prideful, arrogant, useless for the long term benefit of our species. and all other species as a result, because there's no greater predator on this planet than we have been.
Mm.
So it would be a big relief to all those other species if we started acting in accordance with our absolute nature, which I would suggest is loving and considerate and thoughtful, rather than hateful, spiteful, and contemptful.
I think it's the most beautiful place in the world, or like in not in the world, but in. I mean, it's this is just the place. It is
Yeah,
just the place, but it's
probably
to
isn't even a
experience
place.
it.
It's probably not even a place, but we
Yeah,
seem to find it wherever we are, which is curious because it means it may not be in time and space at all. It may just be the absolute nature of our nature is present always. And we've been discounting it and depreciating it so that our actions haven't been fulfilling it naturally as they would. And intuition is very often something said and something done before anybody even realizes they've said it or done it. It just comes naturally because the thinking immediately knows what to do when it's in line with reality. And it absolutely never knows what to do when it isn't. We're the ones asking it to do that thing that it can't do. And to take that responsibility and start to come to terms with this can be very nauseating and feel very sick because my sense is like you talked about being aware of the exhaustion. After the exhaustion, I became aware of the nausea that I carried in my stomach, and I could see the things I did that would trigger it, or the trigger that I used to excuse the things I did to try to cover it. And it began to dissipate and dissolve rather than be a resolution that's constantly, like New Year's resolutions constantly having to be resolved. I made one New Year's resolution 30 years ago, and I've always kept it. And that was to make no New Year's resolutions.
and yeah.
So
Anyway,
it's not a fight. It's not something that takes 3 weeks to exhaust. I just never do it. So I never have. I always succeed at the resolution. But disillusion is a very different thing. Dissolving something is very different than resolving it.
mm,
And the fact is, it's a mirage to begin with. It's smoke and mirrors. When the wind blows, it goes away. Our time is up, I'm presuming.
anyway, I just wanna I just wanna thank you that
Yeah.
guiding me throughout this journey and yeah, I can imagine it must be really beautiful to just watch and just guide me because you definitely holding my hands around it and being there for me and whatever I would say like this inner balance or just stop it's just it says in the big book so beautiful it's like we cease fighting anything and anyone and
Mm.
I have more and more experience about to be in that state for by this time sanity will have returned this sanity what we talk about like what it's you guiding me through this experience and journey which is beautiful and I just wanted to say I really appreciate that.
Well, I thank you for that, and I will assure you that I couldn't do it without you.
Yeah, and look forward to spending time with you always.
All right, man. Have a great day
All
and
right.
all out there.
You too. All right. Bye. Love you.